the destruction of Earth wasn't primarily memorable for the explosions or even the intercontinental firestorms. What truly resonated with humanity was the Draven's bureaucratic send-off, a formal termination notice. A sleek, triangular ship materialized above New York City, broadcasting a message on every screen: Earth has been deemed redundant. Please vacate immediately. Thank you for your cooperation. Attached was a document explaining that humans were an environmental and cultural nuisance, and Earth was scheduled for permanent discontinuation to make way for a hyperspace toll plaza. After a stunned silence, the screams began. The sudden, chaotic exodus from Earth wasn't pretty. A desperate scramble for survival saw reproposed vessels of every description, military cruisers, cargo freighters, even something resembling a glorified food truck, blasting off in a frantic, uncoordinated escape. There were no assigned seats, no evacuation plan, just the primal urge to survive. Amid this disarray was Law Harvick, an agricultural engineer ripped from his work on a prototype banana-peach hybrid. He'd barely managed to escape with a crate of experimental seeds and a mismatched pair of socks. "I didn't even like bananas," he muttered, piloting his escape pod into the swirling mass of fleeing ships. Beside him, his assistant, Jella V, clutched a jar ominously labeled "Do Not Plant," highly experimental, and mumbled, "We're doomed." Utterly, completely doomed. As fragments of their shattered home planet scattered across the solar system, the Draven, with the detached efficiency of someone swatting a fly, simply marked the Earth discontinuation project as complete in their interstellar database. They didn't bother monitoring the fleeing human ships. Why would they? To the Draven, humans were insignificant, their technology laughably primitive, and their cargo, well, hardly a threat. This, as history would later reveal, was a monumental oversight. Only after humanity had settled on various barren, inhospitable rocks across the galaxy did the true magnitude of their loss sink in. Earth hadn't just been a planet, it was a sanctuary, a vibrant ecosystem of trees, oceans, and surprisingly aggressive geese. The realization struck them like a collective punch to the gut. Without the lush landscapes they'd taken for granted, humans developed a singular, all-consuming obsession to bring life back to the dead. The scattered seeds, carried aboard those escaping vessels, became their salvation. Small, tentative experiments on desolate moons gradually evolved into ambitious terraforming projects. Techniques were refined, and mistakes, like the time an experimental shrub devoured someone's boots, were made and learned from. Over centuries, humanity transformed into a species of relentless gardeners, not just cultivating life, but forcing it to thrive in environments that seemed to actively resist the very idea. By the time humanity had mastered the art of coaxing deserts to bloom and tundras to sing with vibrant color, the Draven had long forgotten about their little Earth incident. They had more pressing matters to attend to, like intergalactic tariffs and annual spreadsheet audits. It wasn't until a human ship, sleek, intimidating, and painted a rather alarming shade of chartreuse, appeared on the fringes of Draven space that the bureaucratic aliens even remembered humans existed. The ever-logical Draven assumed the humans had come to plead or negotiate. They were wrong. If humans excelled at anything besides creating existential crises for themselves, it was adaptability. Faced with a universe of lifeless, barren worlds, they hadn't despaired, well, not entirely. Instead, they dug in, often literally, and decided that if the universe wouldn't provide them with a new Earth, they'd build their own. Or 2. Or 50. The initial stages were challenging, to say the least. Terraforming was less a science and more a blend of blind optimism and the occasional, sometimes spectacular, explosion. On Zinara 4, for instance, Law Harvick and his team learned a rather explosive lesson about introducing hyper-efficient algae into a stagnant lake. The resulting oxygen levels were so high that birds spontaneously combusted mid-flight. Tragic, yes, but also strangely beautiful. "We'll call it a learning experience," Harvick had declared, observing the feathered fireballs with a mixture of horror and scientific curiosity. Jella, now a renowned botanist with a reputation for a certain degree of recklessness, had her own share of mishaps. On Elinos, her experimental root system grew with such vigor that it engulfed an entire research station in under an hour. "It's not devouring the station," she'd insisted to a skeptical crew. "It's embracing it." Plants are very emotional, you know. Despite setbacks, humanity persisted. Over centuries, they transformed countless wastelands into vibrant paradises, each one a little more extraordinary, and perhaps a little more peculiar, than the last. One particularly successful project, Zetros 9, became a showcase for humanity's terraforming prowess. What had once been a desolate rock was now a sprawling jungle, complete with rivers, towering trees, and a species of flower that emitted the sound of jazz music whenever the wind blew through it. It was this ingenuity that solidified humanity's reputation as the galaxy's premier terraformers. Not that anyone else in the galaxy particularly cared, yet. But humans didn't just create worlds, they created a culture around their work. Terraforming wasn't just a profession, it was a way of life. Legends were passed down about the seed keepers, those who had salvaged Earth's flora from destruction. Children learned about the Great Evacuation not as a tale of loss, but as the origin story of humanity's ascension as the ultimate creators. And with every planet they transformed, one question grew louder: what happened to the Draven? Across the vast expanse of the cosmos, the true magnitude of Earth's loss settled upon humanity like a heavy shroud. Earth wasn't simply a planet, it was a haven, a vibrant tapestry of life with thriving forests, deep oceans, and surprisingly territorial waterfowl. The realization of what they'd lost struck them with the force of a physical blow. Deprived of the rich landscapes they had once taken for granted, a single, consuming desire took root within the human spirit, to restore life to the lifeless. The seeds they had salvaged, scattered amongst their fleeing vessels, became symbols of hope and renewal. Initial, hesitant attempts at cultivation on barren moons gradually blossomed into ambitious terraforming endeavors. Methods were honed, and errors, like the unfortunate incident involving an experimental shrub and a researcher's footwear, were made and lessons learned. Over generations, humans metamorphosed into a race of persistent gardeners, not merely nurturing life but compelling it to flourish in environments that seemed determined to resist its very essence. The first attempts at terraforming were more akin to reckless experimentation than precise science, often resulting in unpredictable and occasionally spectacular outcomes. On Zinara 4, Lord Harvick and his team discovered a rather explosive consequence of introducing highly efficient algae into a stagnant lake. The resulting surge in oxygen levels ignited birds mid-flight, creating a breathtaking, albeit tragic, display of feathered fireballs. "Consider it a valuable lesson," Harvick remarked, observing the fiery spectacle with a blend of scientific curiosity and dismay. Jella V, now a celebrated botanist with a penchant for daring experimentation, experienced her own share of mishaps. On the planet Elenos, her experimental root system demonstrated remarkable enthusiasm, enveloping an entire research station within an hour. "It's not consuming the station," she reassured the understandably apprehensive crew. "It's merely expressing affection." Plants possess a deep emotional capacity. Despite these setbacks, humanity's resolve remained unbroken. Over centuries, they transformed barren landscapes into thriving ecosystems, each new world more vibrant and often more unusual than the last. Zetros 9, a particularly successful project, showcased the pinnacle of human terraforming ingenuity. This once desolate rock was now a sprawling jungle, complete with flowing rivers, towering trees, and a unique species of flower that produced the melodies of jazz music when stirred by the wind. It was this remarkable creativity that cemented humanity's reputation as the galaxy's foremost terraformers, though the rest of the galaxy remained largely indifferent. However, humans weren't simply creating worlds, they were cultivating a culture around their craft. Terraforming became more than a profession, it evolved into a way of life. Stories of the seed keepers, those who had salvaged Earth's plant life from oblivion, became legendary. Children learned about the Great Exodus not as a narrative of loss, but as the genesis of humanity's ascent to the role of ultimate creators. With each planet they revitalized, a single question gained prominence: what became of the Draven? It was a question rarely voiced openly, as the Draven, after all, had obliterated their home world and left them scattered across the stars. Yet, the seeds of curiosity, sown as deeply as those of Earth's lost flora, began to take root. The answer arrived when a deep space probe, driven by humanity's insatiable thirst for knowledge, detected unmistakable signs of Draven activity at the galaxy's edge. The news spread rapidly. The Draven were not extinct, they were thriving, presiding over a vast empire of meticulously ordered worlds. Humanity's response was varied. Some craved retribution, others sought answers. Lord Harvick, now a venerable figure with a beard so magnificent it possessed its own postal code, had a different vision. They annihilated our planet, he declared, tapping the rim of his mug containing a green, potentially toxic beverage. So, let's reciprocate. But in our own unique style. The room fell silent. Someone coughed nervously. Finally, Jella V, whose eccentricity had only intensified with age, grinned. You propose we outgarden them? Precisely, Harvick replied, his eyes gleaming. Let's transform their perfectly structured worlds into something so vibrant, so irrepressible, that they'll regret ever crossing our path. Thus, the plan was hatched. Not for war, humanity was weary of conflict. Instead, they would embark upon the grandest act of creative disruption the galaxy had ever witnessed. They began assembling their arsenal, seeds, spores, and saplings, genetically modified to flourish in any environment. Some, like the fuzzleberry bush, were harmless, content to grow wherever they pleased and exude a subtle aroma of regret. Others, like the gravitree, subtly warped local gravity fields, making walking a precarious endeavor. And then there were the experimental vines, notorious for their rapid growth and peculiar fondness for headwear. We're not merely terraforming, Jella announced, brandishing a seed the size of her fist. We're terraforming with flair. As the fleet of terraforming vessels set course for Draven space, humanity wasn't fueled by vengeance or hatred. They were driven by a far more potent force, the unwavering desire to make a statement. The discovery of Draven activity at the galaxy's edge, revealed by a human deep space probe, ignited a firestorm of reactions. The Draven, it turned out, weren't gone, they were flourishing, overseeing a vast and meticulously structured empire. Humanity's response was a mixture of anger, curiosity, and a thirst for some form of reconciliation. Lord Harvick, now a venerable figure whose beard was so magnificent it practically had its own gravitational pull, proposed a different approach. They obliterated our world, he stated, gesturing with a mug containing a suspiciously green liquid. Let's return the favor. But with our own unique touch. A hushed silence fell over the room. Jella V, whose eccentricity had only blossomed with age, offered a mischievous grin. You're suggesting we outgarden them? Precisely, Harvick affirmed, his eyes twinkling. Let's transform their perfectly ordered world into something so vibrant, so irrepressibly alive, that they'll forever regret crossing our path. And so, a plan was conceived. Not for war, humanity was weary of conflict, but for an act of creative disruption on a galactic scale. They began assembling their arsenal, seeds, spores, and saplings, each genetically engineered to flourish in any environment. Some, like the fuzzleberry bushes, were benign, content to sprout wherever they landed and exude a subtle fragrance of melancholy. Others, like the gravitrees, subtly distorted the surrounding gravitational fields, turning a simple stroll into a high-wire act. And then there were the experimental vines, known for their aggressive growth and unusual affinity for headwear. We're not just terraforming, Jella declared, holding aloft a seed the size of her fist. We're terraforming with panache. As the fleet of terraforming vessels set a course for Draven space, humanity wasn't driven by vengeance or hatred, but by a far more compelling force, the irresistible urge to make a statement. When the human fleet materialized on the borders of Draven space, the aliens were more perplexed than alarmed. The Draven Council, assembled in a chamber so sterile it could have doubled as a surgical theater, convened to address the unexpected guests. Councillor Irax, whose title translated roughly to Supreme Spreadsheet Overseer, reviewed the data with a weary sigh. Humans, he muttered, the word seemingly leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. Still a nuisance. What could they possibly want? Another councillor, fidgeting with a pen-like device designed purely for the purpose of appearing important, chimed in, they're primitive. Their ships aren't even properly triangular. Irax dismissively waved a hand. Send a greeting. Something polite but firm. Remind them of their insignificance. And so, a message was dispatched: "Humans, you are trespassing in Draven space. State your purpose and depart immediately." The human response was both swift and baffling: "Hello. We brought gifts." The concept of gifts was utterly foreign to Draven diplomacy, which operated on strict protocols, none of which involved unsolicited presence. Suspicious yet intrigued, the Draven permitted the humans to approach a minor colony world designated Zitra 6, which served primarily as an archive planet. It was an unremarkable sphere of data storage units and meticulously manicured shrubbery, precisely the kind of place the Draven adored. Within hours of the humans' arrival, however, the situation began to unravel. The first sign of trouble appeared when atmospheric sensors detected a sudden surge in pollen. Draven scientists scrambled to investigate, but by the time they grasped what was happening, it was already too late. The plants had arrived. It began with a single vine, vibrant green, suspiciously cheerful, and growing at an alarming pace. In mere minutes, it scaled a data tower, breached a ventilation duct, and wrapped itself around the mainframe. From there, it unleashed a torrent of blossoms that released clouds of glittering spores. These spores, it turned out, possessed a remarkable enthusiasm for dispersal. They clung to everything: walls, machinery, the occasional Draven attempting to flee. Soon, the colony was overrun by plants that seemed to share a single, unified objective: to make Zitra 6 interesting. By the end of the first day, Zitra 6 was unrecognizable. Data towers were draped in flowering vines that hummed soft lullabies. The meticulously pruned shrubbery had been replaced by grimble thorns, which erupted in bursts of confetti whenever someone sneezed. And the central plaza was now dominated by a towering tree with bioluminescent leaves that spelled out mildly insulting phrases like "nice try" and "this is why we can't have nice things." The Draven were aghast. Back on the human flagship, Lore Harvick and Jella V observed the unfolding chaos on their monitors. "Phase 1 appears to be a success," Harvick remarked, stroking his now grey beard with a satisfied air. "Too early to celebrate," Jella countered, though a grin played on her lips. "Let's see how they handle the Doom Dandelions." The Doom Dandelions, despite their ominous moniker, were less about destruction and more about being a pervasive nuisance. Their fluffy seeds, carried by the slightest breeze, embedded themselves in every available surface. Once planted, they sprouted instantly, producing more dandelions that repeated the process. Within hours, the colony was blanketed in a layer of soft, golden fluff that was somehow both beautiful and intensely irritating. The Draven were not accustomed to such disarray. Their civilization had spent millennia perfecting the art of order, from the precise geometry of their cities to the color-coded efficiency of their attire. Now, their world was overrun with vines, pollen, and headwear-thieving flora. On Zitra 6, attempts to reclaim the planet met with a disconcerting discovery: the plant seemed to be learning. A particularly persistent Draven officer, attempting to bulldoze a grove of shriek willows, trees known to emit a deafening shriek when approached, found the trees uprooting themselves and pursuing him. Another squad, sent to neutralize a field of smother grass, had their boots entangled while the grass whispered eerie threats of eternal confinement. The Draven Council reconvened, this time in a chamber rapidly being overtaken by invasive ivy. Councillor Irax, whose normally immaculate appearance now included several leaves protruding from his sleeves, slammed his fist on the table. "This isn't an invasion," he declared, "it's a botanical fiasco." "It's worse than that," grumbled Councillor Trell, whose chair was now entangled by a stubborn vine. "These plants defy the laws of nature. Some of them are mocking us." Audibly. "They're just plants," Irax snapped. "We are the Draven, a species of unparalleled intellect and discipline. We will not be outsmarted by foliage." At that moment, a nearby shrub erupted in raucous laughter, as if to directly contradict him. Irax's eye twitched. Desperate, the Draven resorted to their most advanced technology, the Omnipurge device, a machine capable of sterilizing entire ecosystems. Confident that this would finally eradicate the human infestation, they authorized its use on Zitra 6. The pulse detonated, and the plants withered instantly, leaving the planet seemingly barren once more. The Council celebrated their victory for a brief, glorious 6 minutes. Then, the spores activated. In an unexpected turn, the plant's destruction triggered a fail-safe mechanism within their genetic code. The agitated spores began to reproduce at an exponential rate. Within hours, Zitra 6 was greener, louder, and more chaotic than before. The Draven, muttering darkly about mutant weeds, abandoned the planet entirely. Meanwhile, the humans observed these events with unmasked glee. They actually thought a purge pulse would work. Jella remarked, sipping a tea that smelled suspiciously of fertilizer. Law simply chuckled. Amateurs. The Draven escalated their efforts, deploying military forces to the most affected worlds. However, combating the plants proved a demoralizing endeavor. Soldiers attempting to incinerate rude berries were pelted with screaming fruit that hurled insults about their combat prowess and gardening skills. Vines sabotaged vehicles with alarming efficiency, and towering Floricandas, a particularly mischievous hybrid of tree and boa constrictor, developed a peculiar fondness for Draven uniforms. On Drax Prime, the heart of the Draven Empire, the situation reached a peak of absurdity. Entire districts were overtaken by glow blooms, pulsating with disco lights and playing a jaunty tune reminiscent of human polka music. The Grand Registry building, housing centuries of Draven data, was overrun by trickle ferns. These ferns emitted a soothing mist that induced an overwhelming sense of drowsiness in anyone within a 10-meter radius. The building was abandoned after officials repeatedly dozed off during emergency meetings. As the botanical chaos spread, cracks began to appear in the Draven psyche. Once proud and stoic, they found themselves startled by the sight of flowers and developing an irrational fear of vines. "They're watching us," one panicked soldier whispered, eyeing a patch of harmless moss with suspicion. The final straw came when a Draven diplomat attempted to negotiate with what they believed to be a human representative on the colony world of Triath. The representative turned out to be a 12-foot sunflower, genetically engineered to wave enthusiastically and repeat the phrase "lovely weather we're having" in an endlessly cheerful tone. The diplomat resigned the following day, citing emotional exhaustion. Back on the human flagship, Jella was practically giddy. "They're breaking," she announced, scrolling through intercepted Draven communications. "We have them exactly where we want them." "And where is that?" Law asked, though he already knew the answer. Jella grinned. "In the middle of a botanical existential crisis." The Draven Council, now convening in a chamber that resembled a particularly vibrant greenhouse, was in disarray. Their once pristine meeting hall was now a chaotic tangle of vines, luminous moss, and a particularly imposing tree that seemed to have taken root directly through the council table. It stubbornly resisted all attempts at pruning and occasionally muttered disparaging remarks like, "couldn't organize a fertilizer convention," and "amateur hour." Councillor Irax, whose nerves were as frayed as his once immaculate robes, stood to deliver a desperate address. "This situation," he began, swatting at a nearby glow bloom that buzzed irritatingly close to his face, "has spiraled into utter pandemonium. These humans are not merely reckless, they are horticulturally unhinged." "Agreed," mumbled Councillor Trell, whose ceremonial headpiece had been commandeered by a vine and replaced with a makeshift leafy hat. "But what course of action remains? We've exhausted all conventional methods, flamethrowers, vacuums, chemical agents, nothing seems to deter this botanical onslaught." "We must negotiate," Irax declared, his voice wavering slightly. A stunned silence filled the chamber, punctuated only by the gentle rustling of the omnipresent foliage. The councillor stared at Irax as if he'd suggested they attempt interspecies charades. "Negotiate?" Irax repeated, more forcefully this time, brushing aside a persistent vine. "We are the Draven, renowned for our logic and reason. Surely, even these plant-obsessed fanatics can be swayed by rational discourse." Thus, a formal request for dialogue was dispatched to the human fleet. Though formals might be an overstatement, considering the message was delivered by a vine that slithered onto the human's main communications console and spelled out parley in glowing blossoms. Jella burst into laughter. "They're surrendering. They're actually surrendering." "Negotiating," Law corrected, though a grin played on his lips. "Let's hear what they have to say." The meeting was arranged on a neutral moon, selected primarily because its barren surface offered no opportunity for impromptu human terraforming. The Draven delegation arrived first, disembarking from their sleek, triangular ships with as much dignity as they could muster while being trailed by a suspiciously large number of doomed dandelions. The humans, in stark contrast, arrived in a vessel adorned with a giant smiley face and the words "Nature says hi" emblazoned on the side. Law and Jella led the human delegation, stepping out to face the visibly agitated Draven. Irax cleared his throat, attempting to project an air of authority. "Humans," he began, "we wish to discuss terms for a cessation of hostilities." "Wonderful." Jella beamed. "We brought snacks. Care for a fuzzleberry?" Irax stared at her as if she'd offered him a plate of sentient slime mold. "No," he said, regaining his composure. "We propose a ceasefire. In exchange, you will withdraw your—" He paused, wrinkling his nose, "flora from our worlds." Law tilted his head thoughtfully. Tempting. But no." "No?" Irax's voice rose to an uncharacteristically high pitch. "You obliterated our home," Law stated, his tone calm but firm. "So, we've been enhancing yours. Frankly, you should be thanking us." "This isn't enhancement," Trell sputtered. "This is anarchy. We can't conduct official business with plants serenading us during council meetings or vines pilfering our headwear." "Sounds like a you problem," Jella chirped cheerfully. At this, Irax's composure finally fractured. "What do you want from us?" he demanded. Law exchanged a glance with Jella, then shrugged. "An apology would be a good start. And maybe a promise not to obliterate any more planets. That's all." Irax blinked. He'd anticipated demands for territory, resources, perhaps even servitude. "You'll cease this botanical mayhem if we simply apologize?" "Oh, no," Jella said, grinning. "We're not stopping. We've got another 50 planets on our list. But the apology would be a nice gesture." In the end, the Draven did what they did best, adapted through bureaucratic means. A formal declaration was drafted, apologizing for the destruction of Earth and pledging to never again interfere with humanity. It was signed, sealed, and delivered with a vine-wrap bow. However, by then, something unexpected had occurred. As the human plants continued to proliferate, the Draven began to notice benefits. Glow blooms proved surprisingly effective as night lighting. Trickle ferns transformed meditation centers into oases of tranquility. Even the once despised smother grass found a niche as a peculiar, yet effective, security system. And then there was the sheer biodiversity. Planets that had once been sterile and uniform were now teeming with color, sound, and life. Draven scientists, initially horrified, became fascinated. Some even began collaborating with humans, tweaking the flora to better integrate with their ecosystems. The humans, for their part, were delighted. "See?" Jella remarked, watching a Draven botanist meticulously tend a patch of doomed dandelions. "We knew they'd come around." Law chuckled. "It's amazing what a little gardening can accomplish." As the first joint human-Draven terraforming team prepared for their next project, humanity felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. They hadn't just survived, they had thrived. And the galaxy would never be the same, not because of war or destruction, but because someone, somewhere, was always planting something that simply refused to stop growing.